Hello there, everyone. So here we go. Practically speaking, what does an instructional designer do? Instructional designer needs to possess a polymath skill set to create effective courses and educational materials to meet their intended goals. These professionals need not only to master learning design but also technology. I will comment here as if it were a chronological sequence, already preparing you for the stages of building educational content. Cool. Good to point out that I'm going to comment on all the responsibilities of an instructional designer, just as, for example, we can say that a mechanic can repair from planes to cars. Not always an ID has to do everything. We can, of course, specialize in one area or another, enter a field with greater or less depth. So the list will be the ideal process, but that doesn't mean it happens in practice for all projects, all right? So it all starts with the planning, the project kickoff meetings. These are essential for getting the information you need and identifying key stakeholders. Knowing as much as possible about a project, what is needed or expected, and who should approve the final product are critical parts of an e-learning efficient and effective. Initial project meetings typically include you, a project manager, an e-learning system manager, if not the instructional designer as well, the customer or internal stakeholder, and a subject matter expert. This is the time to define the target audience, learning objectives, technical requirements, and other parameters of the project. Are there any specific brand guidelines to follow? And there it is. Then, if it's a more complex project, such as the creation of a school, corporate, university, or content sequence, it will be essential for the instructional designer to transform this information into a pedagogical proposal, a document that will gather the school or project guidelines. How will the content be taught? Why? How will it be formatted? What are the content rules and restrictions? Think of it as the brand guide document used in graphic design, but for education. This document will be used later as reference for all parties that will have a role in the project in some way, such as content writers, designers, developers, and so on. After the kickoff, you may be ready to start storyboarding. The storyboard is a valuable tool to planning effective courses and getting buy-in from stakeholders. Whether you are working for a company developing custom educational solutions or creating a corporate training for your company, you will have a boss, a customer, or a stakeholder who needs to understand your vision. Storyboards can be done in numerous ways. The most common is a slideshow containing each screen of its content, a visual layout of how the material will look once it's ready. For instructional designers working in larger teams, storyboarding is a way for all involved professionals to align, including people in animation, voiceover, development, etc. Showing your bosses a storyboard before moving on to development can help avoid costly rework if the course being developed is not aligned with the vision or needs of your superiors. Using the information received from your kickoff meeting, you can analyze the learning objectives and break them down slide by slide to ensure that you are addressing all of the learning objectives and creating a logical progression of your content. The storyboard also helps you figure out what content, resources, and information you still need before developing the course. It is very common during the creation of the storyboard that realize that some information is missing. Last but not least, we have the content production process. You will likely work with a subject matter expert to obtain the information you need for the course you're creating. They can submit content in the form of a presentation, screen recordings, PDFs, or a plain document. In some situations, if time and budget allow you to, you can even go on site to interview the experts or students and observe the processes. Instructional designers must be good at sorting and digesting content to identify key areas and key points that students need to understand to do their jobs well. I'm not going to cover up the facts here. This part can be more boring because it can involve a lot of back and forth, especially if it's very technical, beyond your understanding. I myself had to produce, for example, content for the health and engineering areas. We had many things that were outside of my area of understanding. But it's up to you to turn technical content into delightful learning experiences, whether through interactive materials, animated videos, or other instructional strategies. This is where you can really get creative and use your knowledge of how people learn and how to create content that engages them and drives behavior change. Of course, the most important thing is that you take into account who your audience is. After all, content might be difficult or boring for you, but for the target audience of that material, it might be the easiest thing in the world. Then this designer can elaborate the contents from writing the text, recording scripts, creating presentations, ebooks, capturing and editing classes, creating interactive materials, quizzes, etc. Of course, each of these materials require a specific skill set, but for smaller teams, we have to do everything. So there are tools called authoring tools, so you're not helpless. Finally, the instructional design must evaluate the content created, evaluating the results. We will look at students' engagement, their performance, whether the content was effective, whether the organizational results were achieved, and of course, implement the necessary changes. See, there is a lot, I know. Remembering that this is just is the idealized process. Each company we adapt the processes, steps, and responsibilities according to the knowledge and resources available. It is worth mentioning that more and more we see tools being created to boost and accelerate several of these processes. This all makes the instructional designer to be able to act further ahead, even create the content or more in the strategy, planning, the evaluation, and evaluating the implementation resources. So to recap, instructional designer will meet with all the stakeholders, put together a content plan, and coordinate the production of each object. For this, he or she has several tools and methodologies which we will discuss throughout this course. I've put together a series of flashcards for you to review some of this process of an ID on the next screen. Check it out and everything will be clearer.